Imagine going to bed in an ordinary world. Your phone charging on the nightstand, the refrigerator humming, a streetlight glowing outside your window. And you wake up in a world that no longer exists. No power, no signal, not a single working screen.
It was a Friday evening in August of 2028. The Cooper family lived on the 7th floor of an ordinary building in an ordinary American city. Dave, the dad, was a grid engineer at the Maple Street substation, the kind of guy who was sure he knew everything there was to know about electricity. Sarah, the mom, was a pediatrician who had promised herself a whole weekend without her phone. 11-year-old Zoe was finishing a level on her tablet. And Grandpa Frank, Dave's father, who lived one floor down, was turning the dial of an old tube radio. Frank had been a ham radio operator for 40 years. He'd been talking to people on the other side of the planet back when the internet wasn't even an idea.
At 8 that evening, a strange story ran on every news channel. Observatories had detected a solar flare of unprecedented power. The scientists chose their words carefully. Possible communication disruptions. The anchors joked about the end of the world.
Zoe looked up and asked.
Dad, can the sun turn us off?
Dave laughed.
The sun keeps us warm, sweetheart. It doesn't flip switches. He didn't know yet that in 6 hours, he'd remember those exact words.
At 2 in the morning, the city was woken not by a sound, but by light. From horizon to horizon, the sky rippled in waves of green and crimson. The northern lights, in a place where no one had ever seen them. People came out onto balconies, filmed it on their phones, gasped. It was beautiful. Impossibly, unforgettably beautiful. Grandpa Frank wasn't admiring the view. He stood at the window, frowning. He had read about this. In 1859, a monster solar flare, history calls it the Carrington Event, set telegraph wires on fire around the world. Sparks jumped from the machines. Paper caught fire on operators' desks. But back then, humanity only had the telegraph. Now, we have everything. At 2:41 a.m., the street lights flickered. Once. Twice. And the city went dark. Not like a normal outage, where your block goes black while the next one over glows like nothing happened. Everything went out, all the way to the horizon. Only the sky kept rolling with cold green fire, and by its light, millions of people saw something they hadn't seen above their city in decades. Stars.
It's so beautiful.
But Dave was already dialing the substation dispatcher. His phone was dead. Not no service dead. Dead, dead.
The first night was almost cozy. They found candles left over from Christmas. Sarah broke out the cookies. Grandpa Frank came up with his thermos. They sat in the kitchen, and Zoe said it felt like camping, except at home. But Dave was quiet. He was the only one who understood what had really happened. A geomagnetic storm pushes rogue current through long power lines, like pouring 10 rivers into a channel built for one. The transformers, enormous machines, some the size of a house, that step the current down from high voltage lines to what flows through your outlets, hadn't shut down. They had burned. And a transformer like that takes months to build. Nationwide, the spares numbered in the dozens, not the thousands. Dozens.
How long? I don't know, but not days.
He stepped out onto the balcony and looked at the city for a long time. In 12 years on the job, he'd never once stopped to count everything that hung on his substation. Lights? Sure, but also elevators, traffic signals, cash registers, ATMs, freezers holding a month of food, the machines in the intensive care unit. Electricity had been like air. You never notice it until it's gone. Down in the courtyard, somebody had already fired up a charcoal grill and was calling neighbors over for hot tea.
and Dave suddenly realized that in 5 years of living in this building, he didn't know a single one of those people by name. Grandpa Frank set his old radio on the table, a tube receiver from the 50s, heavy as a cast iron skillet.
Everything modern is fried, but this old girl has outlived worse.
The radio hissed. Frank turned the dial slowly, and all 4 of them listened to the static of an empty spectrum, the sound of a world that had gone silent.
Morning arrived with a strange silence. No hum of the refrigerator, no elevator, no traffic below. Zoe said she could hear birds. She had never once heard birds from her room. The city looked confused, but calm. Neighbors clustered outside the entrances. Some insisted the power would be back by evening. Others were already hauling bottled water out of the corner store. The pumps were down, which meant that above the 3rd floor, the taps were running dry. Dave figured that out before anyone else and carried up everything in the apartment that could hold water: pots, jars, and Zoe's inflatable kiddie pool off the balcony. By noon, the courtyard had turned into what town squares used to be. Neighbors who had spent years passing each other in silence were introducing themselves. The retired teacher from the 3rd floor gathered the kids and read to them out loud. A college kid from the 5th floor brought down a guitar, and it turned out music works fine without an outlet. And the gruff man from the next entrance, the one everybody was a little scared of, wordlessly carried a camping stove out of his garage and set it on the common table. Hot water. For everyone. Sarah walked to her clinic. Doctors are always needed, and now more than ever. She came back at lunchtime with news. The hospitals had switched to diesel generators, but the fuel would last a week. Gas stations weren't pumping. The pumps run on electricity. On the way home, she saw something she'd remember for the rest of her life. At an intersection with a dead traffic light, a high school kid in an orange safety vest was directing traffic, the few old cars still running, and rivers of people on foot. Nobody had asked him to. He just came out and did it. And here's what struck them most. The city was full of food. Water fell from the sky and flowed in the river. But electricity was the thread that tied all of it together. And without it, the great city was like a body with healthy arms and legs and every nerve cut.
That evening, Frank called everyone downstairs. His receiver had caught a voice. Through the static, far away, first in English, then Spanish, then a man somewhere up in Canada. Ham radio operators around the world were calling out to each other in the dark like lighthouses, and they all said the same thing. It's out. Everywhere. Frank switched off the radio to save the batteries.
So, they'll be fixing this for a long time. But we have to live. Starting now.